Moving on from the Biden's foreign policy anticipation with regard to Africa, the resolution of the United Kingdom Parliamentarians for sanctions against top Nigerian officials and security agents involved in alleged violation of political science and a former Nigerian Minister of External Affairs. Prof, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Tundun. Thank you for having me on your program.
Good morning, Prof. Well, we'll still talk about U.S. and other international issues, but let's start with what affects us immediately, which is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, and even the Minister of Information, saying that, well, whatever conversation may have taken place in the House of Commons about the human rights situation in Nigeria, the hashtag #EndSARS protest, has no effect because really parliamentarians in the UK do not take decisions, and that the Nigerian government is already engaging the UK government to present our own side or the Nigerian side of the story. Are the ministers correct in terms of what they have said, and what channels are available to the Nigerian government for providing their own side of the story?
Since I left office in December 1987, I have made it a point of principle not to comment on the activities of current ministers in the cabinet, especially the Minister of Foreign Affairs, because I just feel that I've had my innings, if I could use cricket language, and I've moved on. I will let my successors have their own innings and let the country be the judge. I don't want to put myself in a position of giving the impression that I know it all. But on a question of principle, if I were giving a lecture to students in the university, I'll point out that there are various inputs that confront decision makers on foreign policy or on any policy for that matter. And debate in the British Parliament is a very important one. It is true it is not the ultimate, but God helps a British minister who ignores the feelings on the floor of the Commons. Many ministers have come to grief by taking a lackadaisical attitude towards the views of Parliament. So I wouldn't brush off quite lightly the debate in the Commons.
Indeed, sir, I completely agree with your thoughts. Did you have something else to say?
Well, I mean, I was surprised Prof was very reluctant to go a bit further. I mean, I didn't ask you to criticize Geoffrey Onyema, just, for our own enlightenment. And you've made a point. But what are the channels available to the Nigerian government in terms of providing their own side of the story in response to the conversation on the floor of the House of Commons?
Oh, I see. That's Dr. Abati, isn't it?
Yes.
All right. I mean, sorry, these ears are not as young as they used to be. So, and I haven't seen Dr. Abati face to face for several years. So at times I'm not too sure. Now, the channels open to the Nigerian government are many. High Commissioner here to talk to the Director of Europe, or to the Undersecretary, or to the Permanent Secretary, or to the Minister himself. Then at the London end, our High Commissioner there can book an appointment to go into the Foreign Office and see the officer dealing with Nigeria, the officer dealing with West Africa, the Permanent Secretary, the Under Permanent Secretary, and of course, the Minister. So there are all those channels there. And there are, of course, what one calls the invincible channels in foreign policy. There are people who play golf with each other, whether at the Abuja golf course or at the London golf course, who are friends and who have interests on both sides and who can whisper into each other's ears. And then, of course, there are the journalists, especially at the top-ranking level, editor of a major newspaper who probably went to Eton or Harrows with a prominent Nigerian who is not holding public office. And after having a glass of whatever it is that they share together in the golf house, then exchange views on Nigeria, deliberately, of course. And this then gets reflected in a major editorial in the newspaper. So there are various channels.
And we hope that the Nigerian government will avail themselves of these channels. But back to the sort of flippant dismissal that we're seeing from the federal government and how inappropriate that might actually be as a response, I wanted to ask you, while we watch sort of the current debacle in the United States and note that Nigeria has copied the presidential style, do you think that Nigeria needs a parliamentary system? Because I have to admit, when I was watching this debate that was held on the floor of the House of Commons with MPs, I feel like we're missing a trick. Because you had Labour MPs, Conservative MPs, and that one SNP MP engaging in this discussion, not even a debate. They were able to see things. They were able to be on the same side in spite of different party affiliations. We also had the voice of the opposition making as much of an impact as voices from the Conservative Party who are currently ruling. You had such intelligent, robust, input, apart from one unfortunate utterance that I will not bother repeating here. And I thought we have in England a system where they have their Her Royal Majesty's most loyal opposition, as they call it. The leader of the opposition is officially recognized, giving a separate salary. And you compare what happens in Nigeria, where voices of the opposition are completely lampooned, dismissed, just treated like they don't exist, in sort of a pseudo-military fashion. What do you think we need to do in Nigeria to strengthen our democracy, which we can all agree does need work?
Tundu, let me start off by being a bit personal. My father was a member of the Independence Parliament. He came in 1959 and left in 1964, before the rain started to fall on our heads. And he told us stories about the debates in the Nigerian parliament. He told us about who flowed and who didn't flow. He didn't change votes because those were determined by the parties. But there was an uplifting of the soul when you had Atonia and Nahoro in flowing language denouncing the foreign policy of the government. And you had Chacha Jaja Wachuko, a very educated, very well-read foreign minister, giving it back to him. So I must say that, and of course, enjoying debates myself, having gone to the best school in Nigeria, Igbubi College, where we had weekly debates. It runs in my veins. However, I also must admit that I did switch to the presidential system because I thought it made sense that whoever was going to govern Nigeria should not just be somebody from one constituency who might never have visited other parts of Nigeria, and then he becomes prime minister, and you then wish he had a national world view rather than that locality where he came from. I must, however, then admit that I have come around to your point of view when I see the mutual levity with which ministers treat members of the National Assembly, and members of the National Assembly treat in return, retaliate by also the lack of civility which they extend to ministers. And if you ask me to vote now, I think I have gone back to the parliamentary system. So I do agree with you. I'm sorry I've given a long-winded answer, but I wanted to give you the background to my point of view. I agree with you in total. I think we should go back to the parliamentary system. At least the Prime Minister weekly will face questions from the opposition, and you will know his point of view. You will know whether he's just reading from his script or he actually has been persuaded. The Prime Minister wouldn't want to be made a fool of, and therefore he will be briefed by officers, in his office, because of the issues that will come before Parliament.
Right, sir. Thank you so much for that input, sir. I just want your take on this and the image, most importantly, of Nigeria. Before the UK parliamentarians debated on this, a certain Nigerian DJ, as witness to all of this, had a deposition at the Canadian Parliament. So we've been in 2 parliaments now, plus the fact that another international media outlet, CNN, has been back and forth with the Nigerian government as regards. In fact, in the space of about 2 weeks, CNN has churned out 2 reports to corroborate their initial stand that negates what the government said. So it's been a lot of back and forth, or like in the urban local dictionary, young people term they use these days, basketballs going on between Nigeria and the international community. I mean, what does this portend for the image of Nigeria?
The first time, I believe it was on your program, or maybe it's another program, this issue was raised with me. And I did say, if there is one thing I learned from my years in office, it is never to take on the press. You just won't win. They will have the last word on you. Number 2, they have access to by the time a journalist asks you a question, he knows the answer you should give. And when you give an answer that provokes him, you are opening yourself to really what you shouldn't open yourself to. You are quite right. There is now a battle for the public image of Nigeria internationally going on. I'm one who's always wanted Nigeria to be in the international eye, but not this way. And I think that the government, believe me, the government ought to reappraise its strategy of dealing not just with the CNN, but with the whole issue. You see, the president himself keeps praising the youth. He keeps being positive about what the youth movement, and yet there are agencies of government that are condemnatory and negative, and I must say persecutory of the youth. By now, I believe everybody should read the tea leaves and know that the world is on the side of the youth. And quite appropriately too. So let us stop this. I mean, let's draw the line and look for a positive way to get back on an engagement route, not only with the youth, but with the international community. I heard what your correspondent in London was saying about Biden's likely attachment to democracy and development in Africa. Definitely, this is an indication that they will be on the side of the youth movement. So let us clean out this slate before January 20 comes, so we don't start off on a negative note with an incoming American administration.
Well, thank you, Prof, for referring to the John Cookson report on Biden's likely foreign policy approach to Africa. One of the takeaways for me in that report is that, well, there's likely to be a change of tone, which means Biden is not likely to call African countries shithole countries. But the other leg of that report indicated that a change in substance may take a little time. Do you agree with that? And if there's really going to be any change at all in terms of approach, what do you think should be the priority areas for Biden with regard to Africa, particularly now that he has appointed as his UN permanent representative someone who knows Africa very well, and you know, a diplomat whom I'm sure you've had cause to relate with in the course of her career on the as you know, someone in charge of African affairs.
Dr. Abati, you've teased out several issues, as you normally do, while pretending to be asking just one question. Now, where do I start? You are quite right that there is going to be a change of tone. Last night, I listened to the incoming president's Thanksgiving address to the American nation. And I must say also to the world. I mean, if I sat here in Lagos listening to it, I'm sure there are people all over the world also who are listening to it. And it took me back to the years of John F. Kennedy and the years of Obama in terms of the flowery language that he used. Biden, of course, is no orator, we know that. But here was a calming speech that was targeting the positive sides of Americans, that calmed the soul. It was not the ingratiating and irritating tone that we've had in the past 4 years. And I also one of my takeaways from Biden's speech was the way he kept linking America with the world, being conscious that the rest of the world was listening to him. And I came away from that, you know, feeling, well, positive. However, I have reservations about the cabinet that he has picked. Let me again go back to what your correspondent from London said, because there's a linkage to it. This thing about development and democracy. One of the tragedies of the world has been that liberal Democrats have actually gone into wars, started wars in the world, either in the name of security or in the name of democracy. You remember Gaddafi in Libya. You remember Syria. You remember Iraq, I believe. And of course, Biden voted for all these wars, including the ones started by Republicans. That bothers me, that worries me. And I hope that we are not going to have democracy on horseback, charging into different areas of the world under the guise of trying to enforce or impose democracy. So that's the first thing, that's my first reservation about this cabinet. The second one is Biden, or let me be respectful, incoming President Joe Biden had been in Washington for 40 years. I would have expected that among this top echelon of security and strategic team that he had, there would have been a few more variegated faces. I mean, he did promise us that his cabinet was going to reflect the rainbow that is the United States. I would have expected a few more strands of that rainbow. And it bothers me that in 40 years in Congress or in Washington, Biden didn't know of any more Afro-American professionals or professors or high-ranking businessmen who are Afro-Americans who could have come in at that level. Let me please illustrate my point. Bush the elder, or Bush the father, when he became president, he went into the American Army and brought out Colin Powell to make him National Security Advisor. I had never heard of the name Colin Powell, but after that, surely the whole world did hear of him. And when George Bush, the son, became president, he went into academia and brought out Condoleezza Rice to become his national security advisor. Surely Biden, after 40 years in Washington, perhaps could have done better than he has done. This is not to, I'm not underplaying the appointment to the United Nations. As you quite rightly said, I know the lady involved. I mean, she's a professional to the tips of her fingers, having served for over 30 years in the State Department. But I'm just saying that my own expectation is that we could have had more from that. Because let us get this very, very clear. And now I will hold Biden's feet to the fire on this. By Iowa primaries, New Hampshire primaries, his political career was dead. It took the black votes in Carolina, in Virginia, and in all those areas where there were heavy black votes to resurrect that political career. If not for them, we wouldn't be talking about an incoming President-elect Biden. And I think he owes them something.
Well, sir, you're just saying, and you're correct to say, and it's important to say, while a lot of cabinet positions are still yet to be filled, it's important to get all these views across. Like, we could have African Americans in education, health, and since you mentioned George H.W. Bush, the elder, CIA director. That's still up for grabs. So it's important to say. But I wanted to go back to your point about Joe Biden's voting record. He's clearly not dovish when it comes to wars, but he does claim, at least, to have had divergent views on Libya and Syria, because he did say that he did not support the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi, for which we are still paying such a terrible price with the rise of ISWAP, which is affecting us directly in Nigeria. I'd like you to address that claim that he made and what that could mean for the fight against insurgency in Nigeria. And also the fact that he said this is not going to be an Obama third term. What could that also mean in terms of a departure from Obama's style, foreign policy-wise?
Okay. This issue of is this Obama third term had been raised in terms of the selections he's made into the cabinet. So if you don't mind, I'd like to address that first and then go back to the other issues that you have raised. Under the American system, when the Democrats come in, they go and pick on people who have served in the last Democratic administration and who are then scattered either into law firms, into the university, or into the private sector. The Republicans also do the same, so that you are not, building from the foundation all the time. You build on the experience and personnel that served the last administration. I had made reference to Colin Powell, who served George the father. But when George the son came in, he also appointed him Secretary of State. Or there's Karl Kapp Weinberger, who served 3 Republican American presidents. So I'm not surprised that Biden will also be bringing in personnel who has served under Obama. That's just the tradition of the American system. As regards whether he will pursue different foreign policies, I'm happy. I did note his conversion on the way to Damascus, if one could put it that way, by claiming that he was opposed to the war or the insurrection in Libya and what happened in Syria. But he was the vice president, and he's not going to wash himself clean of that. Neither is he going to wash himself clean of all the votes that he cast for previous wars. But it is a welcome admission on his part. Our own national interest, however, dictates that he doesn't turn his back on the war against what language did you use now? Anyway, against Boko Haram, ISIS, and other security issues that bedevil Africa, West Africa especially, because some of those things are playoffs from what happened in Libya. All those weapons that disappeared in Libya found their way into the West African market. I will hope that we will get his support. It is in the American interest in any case. But where there is a clash between the war against terrorism and human rights considerations, because don't forget that, again, he served in an administration that refused to sell weapons to Nigeria. And I think that Dr. Abati knows what I'm talking about. He probably knows this more than I do, but they did refuse to sell weapons to us. And when we tried to buy those weapons from South Africa, it was the CIA, through the American administration, that tipped off the South African intelligence, and they seized that plane that was supposed to go and buy those weapons. They also blocked our attempt at getting weapons from Israel. Now, especially the issue we've talked about, given now the consideration of the world over the EndSARS movement and what looks to the rest of the world as an inconsiderate treatment of the youth, is this going to impact on their support for our fight against terrorism? It's a toss-up that we will need to be careful about. But the incoming administration is not going to turn a blind eye to what it regards as a war against human rights.
Okay, sir, I've got two scenarios. That'll lead me to two questions. The first will be the infighting in the socialist bloc in the Democratic Party. We've had this list now, although there are still some positions to go, but we've not heard of a certain Elizabeth Warren, which actually takes the same slant with another man that almost nicked it, called Bernie Sanders. They take that very socialist hard line in the left of the Democratic Party. How will Biden navigate through that? Because increasingly, a lot of young people in America are fast going to that angle that says free education and the likes in America. The second slant will be, how will the Biden administration navigate with some caprices of world politics and the dominance and emergence of countries like Turkey and Russia? And I'll give you the instance. Nagorno-Karabakh, for instance, it's either Russia taking a side and Turkey taking a side. In Libya, Russia is making a big incursion. It's pretty much on the side of Khalifa Haftar, supplying weapons and the likes, and the United Nations taking another side, the Benghazi government and the Tripoli government. How will America navigate its way through all of this, owing to the fact that Turkey, too, has emerged a strong power in all of this?
Well, we will have to start off by saying 78 million Americans voted for the Democratic Party. Or if you want us to be more specific, they voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. In spite of the fact that they were aware that there was a socialist wing within the Democratic Party. And Trump played this up, thinking he would frighten the Americans away. But 78 million Americans ignored the attempt to demonize the Democratic Party based on the existence of what you've just said, the socialist wing. So to that extent, even though the United States claims not to be a socialist country, but as a professor of political science, I just know we are just playing with words. Because the American government ownership, since the days of Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, America's moved into the American government has moved into the private sector. They have welfare packages. They have the Obamacare. These are all programs which look after the interest of every single American, or at least Obamacare, attempted its coverage. It is even the Republicans who derailed the extensiveness of the Obamacare. But in terms of regulation of business. It is Trump who has tried to roll that back. So it may make more political sense not to use the ideologically abrasive word of socialism, but believe me, the capitalism that is tried, that's operated in the United States, does look like it has socialist glues to it. And I think the Biden administration must not ignore that. All it needs to do is to expand Obamacare, but I'm afraid, one should be realistic enough that the Americans haven't voted the Republicans into what looks like control of the Senate, even though I know Georgia is coming in January. So Georgia is going to be on everybody's mind, thanks to Ray Charles. We may still not know how that will go, but if the Republicans capture the Senate, well, then there is a limit to which Biden is, whatever may be his own preferences, will be able to accommodate the socialist wing of the Democratic Party. But there are a few liberal senators, Republican senators, that I think this reaching out across the aisle may be able to pull into support for Biden's programs, although there are conservative Democrats as well. Well, in the area of foreign policy, yes.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yes. In the area of foreign policy that you have alluded to, what I will call the expansion of Turkey, of China, of Russia, into new areas, America is still a powerful country. Under Trump, it lost its greatness because greatness is a measure of admiration, of respect. It lost some of that, but powerful in terms of the military. America is still a powerful country. It's still a superpower. And you may find and we've made reference to this within a different context, but I can see these young faces that's formed the security team. It reminded me of the brightest and the best team that John F. Kennedy drew from Harvard when he became president. They are all young faces. Yes, they might have been around Washington for some time, but they look pretty young to me. And I won't be surprised if they will seek to engage the rest of the world in these areas. Nothing encourages a dictator than when he doesn't meet any opposition. But nothing then concentrates his mind than when he meets a powerful opponent with clearly articulated and focused objectives. And I think we are going to get that from the Biden team.
Well, Prof, I would have loved you to comment a little bit more on your claim that Vice President or President-elect Joe Biden has not looked far afield enough. But I think with the 6 major appointments that he has announced so far, he may have met that expectation that he will reflect the rainbow nation of the United States with a Latino as Homeland Security Advisor, with Kamala Harris as Vice President, and with Ambassador Greenfield, going to the United Nations. But we don't have any more time, so we'd like to thank you very much for your insights and for joining us on the morning show. Thank you very much, sir.